Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Hill. I'm the Director of Community Outreach at Guardian Recovery. I'm also the founder of Speak Sobriety. I've been in recovery myself for 12 years. And for the past 9 years, I've been going around to different schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, and different community events, sharing my personal story about my struggles with mental health, substance use, and ultimately the journey to recovery as well. I'm excited to host Garden Recovery Live tonight. So we'll just give it about 1 minute to give some people a chance to sign on, and then we'll get started. Okay, we're gonna get started here. So before I get into the slide deck and some of the talking points, I'm just gonna share a little bit of my story and my background and why this is all so important to me. So, like I said before, my name's Stephen Hill. I've been in recovery myself for over 12 years, and just like I thought at my lowest point, this I would never be able to come out of it. At the beginning, I never thought it would happen to me in the first place. People think that in order for you to go down the path of substance use and addiction, you have to come from a broken home, abuse, neglect. And while all of that is certainly relevant, it's not necessary. I grew up in Rockland County, New York. It's about a half hour north of New York City. I have a very supportive family. My father's a lawyer. My mom's a computer programmer. Both of them were very involved in my life growing up and still are. I have three brothers, a brother who's a year older than me, a brother who's 4 years younger, and a brother who's 9 years younger. And none of them have ever had problems with drugs or alcohol. Never have, and they probably never will. So my brothers and I, we all grew up in the same house, same family, same type of friends. We all played sports. I mean, we were pretty much raised exactly the same. Why am I the one with the problem, but nobody else in my family has it? Well, the reason why to me is one of the most important parts of any talk I give. And that's where you can connect mental health and substance use and get a better understanding of the reasons why people use substances in the first place. And it's not because we're bad people. There are people who struggle with depression, with anxiety, trauma, bullied, low self confidence, low self esteem, wanting to fit in, wanting to be cool, wanting to be accepted by a group. Some people do go home to this every single day, and some people just want to feel okay. Those don't sound like bad people to me, but the problem is any relief that you get from a substance we know is only temporary. You keep using, it stops working when your body develops a tolerance. And drugs and alcohol do something much worse than just changing the way that we feel. They could change who we are. And it's not a better version of ourselves. In fact, we can get progressively worse until one day you can lose your true self completely. And unfortunately, there are some people who never make it back from that. For me personally, I had low self confidence and low self esteem because I struggled in school. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in second grade. I felt like there was always something wrong with me. I felt like there was three conversations going on in my brain at the same time. If I wasn't playing sports, I did not feel comfortable in my own skin. But because I excelled in sports, I always played up with older kids. I realize now I wasn't just chasing the drugs and the alcohol. I was chasing the validation, the acceptance I received from my older peers when I used drugs and alcohol with them. All this together and having a genetic predisposition because addiction does run on my father's side of the family, I developed a severe substance use disorder. What does that mean? There are definitions. Mine, it's a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you joy until you experience no joy at all. Whenever I took that first drink or that first drug, I couldn't stop after it. It got worse, progressed to harder things, and negative consequences followed. For me, my journey with all this started in that transition period, middle school to high school, eighth to ninth grade. I had made the JV lacrosse team as an eighth grader, so I'm a middle school student playing a high school sport around some of these older kids. And I heard some of them talking about drinking, smoking, going to parties. And so I didn't use anything in middle school, but as soon as I got into high school, that changed. And I was invited to some parties and around some of these older kids. And that's when I started using alcohol and nicotine. A few months later, I tried marijuana. I did that maybe 10 times my freshman year. And by the end of that school year, I really didn't experience any negative consequences from it. I was able to hide it from my parents. And the way I was able to hide it is I wasn't really doing it all that much. And when I did, I would sleep out at a friend's house. And we would always pick the friend that had the parents, who was usually a divorced parent who was working all the time or wasn't home or just somebody didn't really care what we were doing. And so I would sleep out at that house. And that's how I was able to hide my substance use. But then the summer going to my sophomore year, I was already addicted. I started selling it for one of my older friends to support my habit. And now all of a sudden, these early warning signs of substance use and mental health struggles are starting to come in. And so I'm just going to share some of my lived experience here. So all of a sudden, I started failing classes. I was ineligible to play sports, which was the most important thing in my life growing up was sports, lacrosse and ice hockey. So now I'm ineligible to play because of my grades. My behavior started to change. I started becoming erratic. I started forming a completely different group of friends. Our only purpose hanging out with each other was to use drugs. And you'll start to notice that the friends that are doing the right thing, they're not hanging around anymore. And all of a sudden, this new group of friends starts to show up. I started just the music I listened to, the type of movies I watched. I became very secretive. I was locking doors everywhere I went. I was asking for money all the time. Then I stopped asking for money because I was selling it. I'm nodding out. I have bloodshot eyes all the time. I'm not taking care of myself. So one of these things alone, okay, but several of these together, and you likely have a problem. And the second bullet point here is the role of family in identifying and addressing concerning behaviors. And at this point in my addiction, it's so important, not just for parents, but for siblings who are close in age as well. Because I have an older brother who's 16 months older than me. And we had a lot of the same friends. And so we went to the same parties, hung out with the same people. And he never used drugs in high school, but he did drink some alcohol. And he also knew what I was doing. And instead of going to my parents, we were kind of in on it. Now, that started to change once things became a problem. But by the time my parents figured it out, I was already addicted. And then when they went to my brother and asked him why he didn't say anything, he's like, well, I felt like a lot of people do it. Like, it's just a phase. Like, it really wasn't a problem for him for a while, but like now I'm starting to see it. But now at this point, it's too late. I'm already addicted. And unfortunately, I had to go through a lot of problems, a lot of struggles for a long time. My junior years when I started dipping into the harder substances, cocaine, Xanax, I ended up getting kicked off my school hockey team for behavioral issues. And that's what I was sent to my first adolescent treatment program. I was defiant. I was unwilling to go to treatment. And so I was one of those kids where my parents hired sober escorts in the middle of the night and dragged me out to a wilderness program. And I was there for about 8 weeks. And I came home, and this reintegration was very tough. And we'll get into this later in the show. I came home. I was in alternative school for half the day, and then I was in my regular school for half the day. And if there was one other person in my school that was trying to live a life in recovery, I really didn't know who they were. I felt so alone in this, and ended up being denied the opportunity to play lacrosse. The school had extended my suspension, which that's not something I agree with at all. I feel like if somebody is doing well, you want to include those positive things into their life. And so I relapsed. Things got worse my senior year. I found the opioid painkillers. I barely graduated high school. And from age 18 to 24, I went through the revolving door of getting arrested, going to treatment, coming out, and doing it all over again. I'm very lucky to be alive today. I can tell you that if what is going on with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's 50 to 100 times more powerful than heroin and morphine, If what's going on with fentanyl today, if that was going on 12 years ago and prior to that when I was still using, there's no way I would have ever made it out alive. It's just that much more dangerous to use drugs today. This is why early intervention and treatment is so important today. And so I was very lucky to be able to make it out. I went through countless 28-day programs. And at the end, I went through a year-long treatment program, which is where I began to put my life back together. Went through a program for about a year, worked there for a while, ended up going back to school, got a job there for a while. And when I went back to school, I got my degree in criminal justice. From there, I went to law school to become a defense attorney. And for the past 9 years, I've been a speaker. I go around to, again, schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, sharing my personal story to prevent substance use, to early intervention is also part of it. And then also giving people hope that you can recover from this, and I have a life today that I never thought I would have. But there are so many things along the way that I feel that parents could benefit from being educated on. My parents, one day they don't have this problem, and the next day they have it. And there are so many things that can get in the way of somebody really trying to get that help. And to me, number one is stigma, right? Stigma does two things very well. It causes more people to become addicted, and it causes less people to ask for help and get the treatment they so desperately need. The reason why it causes more people to become addicted is because nobody wants to believe it's going to happen to them. I'm not like those people. And then when it does happen to them, they're less likely to speak up and ask for help because of the judgment and the shame and the guilt that can come with it. Now, I will say stigma has definitely gotten better, but we have a long way to go. And how you deal with it and how you talk about it can really have a major impact on your teen. It can. If you're the type of family that's trying to hide it and you make it seem like something is morally wrong, they're going to feel it. You have to treat it as like any other disease. I'll give you a very good example of stigma is I had spoken at an International Overdose Awareness Day event. I connected with the family afterwards. It was a mother and a daughter, and they were there honoring the son and the brother who had died a few years earlier to a drug overdose. He was a young kid who died. And the mother was telling me that at the same time that her son was going through this addiction, her daughter had leukemia. And she said that the response from the community, from her family, from her friends could not have been any different. When people found out her daughter had leukemia, they got get well cards and flowers and phone calls and visits and people bringing food to the house, offering to do drop offs and pickups. But when people found out her son had this substance use disorder, this addiction, they got distance and shame and guilt. And so this is why we have to look at it. It's just like any other disease. There is no value in degrading people and treating them like they're morally wrong when really they just have a disease that is treatable. Now, there are some parents who hesitate to send their kid to an addiction treatment program because of misconceptions about treatment programs. There are some families that say to me, well, I've heard that if you send an adolescent to a treatment program, they're just going to get worse in there because they're just going to learn things from other kids. Like take a whole bunch of troubled kids and put them together, and they're just going to teach each other bad things. We are aware at Guardian, we are aware that is a problem for some treatment programs who don't address that. We are aware that when somebody is an adolescent, they're in a treatment program, it's unlikely. Now, sometimes there's exceptions, but it's unlikely they're very willing or motivated to be there. We work on that and we get them there. When they first come there, a lot of times people don't want to be in treatment, right? And so we're aware of all that, and we have all these different safeguards in place to ensure that when somebody starts to war story or starts talking about things that aren't conducive to recovery, we will redirect. We will remove that person from the group or bring them back, things like that. So we are aware of that. And there are treatment programs that don't deal with that, but I can assure you at Guardian, we take care of that. Overcoming resistance from adolescents who may not want help. There's this misconception that you have to hit rock bottom, that the person has to want it for themselves. That's just simply not true. Now, at some point, the individual person has to want it for themselves, but you can't expect an adolescent to hit that point on day one. I mean, I've seen very few get to that point on day one. It's our job to put them in an environment that's conducive to recovery And what we will do with your help is to create willingness to change. That's not going to happen if they're at home using substances every single day and things are just getting worse. That happens when you put them in an environment that's conducive to recovery, and we help them with that. Now, if you have an adolescent that doesn't want to go at all, that's where sometimes interventions are necessary. There's different things that we can do to help somebody who doesn't want to get help. Okay. So, what to expect during the initial assessment process? So, we talk about what's called a biopsychosocial. So they'll go through your biology. That could be your family history, your genetics. They'll go through some of your psychology. That could be any type of mental health struggle, and they'll go through the social. That's your family, your environment. Did you grow up in this? Is this run in the family? I mean, they all kind of integrate with each other. That's what to expect during like an initial assessment process. Discussing treatment openly with your adolescent, that's again goes back to the stigma piece of it, really being willing to have those conversations like you're treating any other disease. A common question that we get asked when somebody does go into treatment is, how soon will I be able to talk with my teen when they're there? Now, there is certainly some type of blackout period. It's not set in stone. It's going to be on an individual basis. But sometimes what we've seen and what I've experienced both as a resident in treatment programs and as a staff member is sometimes an individual person is doing well. They go and they make a phone call, and things get much worse. They have a disagreement, they have an argument, I want to leave, I want to get out of here, and the person storms out, and then the progress that we made, now we have to deal with the fallout again. So sometimes we refer to it as the pain box, the phone box, right? And so sometimes it's necessary for the individual person to take a time out to work on themselves. Now, you will always be able to get in touch with staff members, with counselors, that you will always be able to, but sometimes it's necessary to give your teen a chance to just focus on themselves. Okay. So, give you like an overview of the facilities here. So, I'm just going to give you like a basic understanding of like what life is like in treatment. There's a wake up time. You wake up, you make your bed, you clean your room, you organize your stuff, you brush your teeth, you take a shower, you go downstairs, you'll have breakfast, then you'll start your day. There'll probably be some type of like meditation group, mindfulness, could be yoga, meditation. There will be individual counseling. There'll be group therapy. There'll be another meal, there'll be lunch, there'll be some downtime. Sometimes I'll have a chance to exercise, there'll be a dinner. Then normally we'll have some type of outside speaker come in, could be some type of 12-step support group, AA, NA, something like that. It's a very important part of this process. Then there could be a reflection group, some downtime, and then there'll be lights out. That's just like a general overview. I mean, each day looks a little bit different, depends on what phase of the program you're in, but that's just like a general understanding of what it is. Um, the role of peer support and community in adolescent recovery, I mean, that's crucial, where they can form those bonds in there. I mean, just simply knowing that you're not alone, because sometimes when we're stuck in it, we feel like we're alone and we're never going to get out of this. And so having that peer support, it's part of the reason why we bring in outside speakers and people from the community to connect with them. Alumni especially can be really powerful when someone who was in their position has now been able to graduate the program and is now doing well and can share that hope, can share that experience with somebody. So very important part of this. Again, the family is going to be it's going to be ongoing, and you have to be willing to not just take part in the family therapy that's to be going on with guardian, but to also work on yourself as an individual. If addiction is a family disease, then recovery must be a family journey, and you have to be part of that journey, both working with your team and working on yourself as an individual. Now, supporting your teen while maintaining healthy boundaries. To me, that's something I talk a lot about with even just like prevention, people who haven't had this problem at all in the first place. And that's just making your expectations very clear from the beginning, not in like a very strict or overbearing or degrading way. It's just you're making it clear that this is not something that's acceptable in our home. This is not something that we do. if you do decide to start using drugs and alcohol or start using substances again, there are going to be consequences to it. But you also have to show some flex. Your kids cannot fear you more than the consequences of using drugs and alcohol. You want to try and find that healthy balance where you're maintaining those boundaries, but also showing some flex, understanding that it's very hard to stay sober, especially for an adolescent. And if they have that slip up, it doesn't have to be the end of the world because early intervention is key. You want them to come to you and to figure out why, what led you there. A lot of times when parents catch their kids using drugs or alcohol, even in the first place, or whether it's a relapse, the first question is usually, who gave it to you? It's not why'd you do it? What led you there? Or why what was going on in your head? What were you feeling? You're always looking to blame somebody else. And so just, why'd you do it? Get to that first. Addressing parental guilt, frustration, or fears during treatment. So I'll start with the guilt. This is something that my family really experienced. So unless you are a parent who is providing drugs and alcohol to your child, or you are a parent who is physically or verbally abusing your child, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Again, if you're the one selling it to them, providing it to them, you're verbally abusing or physically abusing them, then yes, it's your fault. But if you are a parent who's not doing any of those things, it's not your fault. Everyone reacts differently to this. I have three brothers who never had any of the issues that I did. We all grew up in the same house. We were raised the same way, and we all have different stories. It's just to me, it's about the genetics, it's about the mental health, it's about your environment, it's about when you start using. And I just have that gene. When I pick up that substance, it's just go, go, go. Again, I had ADHD growing up, always felt like there was something wrong with me. And so I started at an earlier age because I was an athlete playing up, and you take all that stuff together, and that's how it happened to me. And parents, and then when it does become a problem and parents are trying to deal with it, it can be a very frustrating process, addiction treatment, because it's not a straight line. It's not like if your teen broke their arm and the doctor says just put a cast on it in 8 weeks you'll be good. It doesn't work that way. It can be a frustrating process, and that's why it's so important to reach out and to ask for help. And yeah, the fear of the unknown. I understand all that. Again, that's why parent support groups are so important. We're going to talk about how we have those. It's every single Wednesday at 7 p.m. virtual meeting. It's a parent support group. I encourage every parent to go to something like that because everyone needs that support. So this to me was when I was going through this slide deck before this presentation, this to me was just such a difficult part because I remember what it was like. My junior year of high school, I went away to a wilderness program and I came back. Again, I was in an alternative school for half the day. Then I was in my regular school for half the day. And I just felt so alone in there. I felt like there was nobody else doing what I was supposed to be doing. And that's why it's so important to find those support groups, to ask for help, to see if there are young people's meetings in your area, because there always are. It's just sometimes they're not so easy to find. That's why you ask us for, we'll provide any guidance that we can with support like that. Changing those friendships. It's really hard when you have lifelong friends who don't understand addiction and recovery, and they're just not being supportive. And so for a time being, they may have to distance themselves from those people. And there are a lot of adolescents that will say, like, I feel like I'm missing out. I'm not allowed to go to parties, and I'm not allowed to do this, and not allowed to do that. And yeah, there's not an easy answer there because yeah, it does mean missing out on some of that because the consequences for them could be severe. And then that's trying to build those healthy habits and healthy routines and really just taking it one day at a time. But I will never sugarcoat it and say that reintegration is going to be easy because it's not, but it is possible. How to handle setbacks without judgment. To me, it's kind of going back to what I was saying before. Let's get to the why. Let's not talk down to people. Let's really try and be supportive and encourage them to reach out to their counselors, to reach out to their network when they do have that slip, or if they do have that slip. And create that environment. You can't be drinking and smoking in front of your kid all the time. I mean, I'm not saying that parents could never drink alcohol at all, but I would say that you should not really, especially at the beginning, you should do your best to create an environment that has little to no triggers and is conducive for recovery. And it means making some sacrifices on your part. The importance of aftercare and outpatient programs. Again, this is recovery is a lifelong process. It's a step down process. One of the biggest mistakes that I made, that my family made, is I went away for 28 days and then that was it. Right? I went to that wilderness program first, but then at 18 years old, I was sent away to a treatment program for 28 days, moved back into the same environment, around the same people, doing the same thing over and over again, and I expected a different result, but there was no different result. There's a saying that nothing changes if nothing changes. I don't 100% agree with that, because if nothing changes, something's going to change. Except it's not going to stay the same. It's going to get worse. That's what it was for me. Is I didn't change anything about my environment, and so I didn't get better. It didn't stay the same. I got progressively worse. And so ongoing treatment is step down treatment is a very important part of this. And then, you know, support groups could be a lifelong thing, but you'll start to see where you don't look at going to counseling or to a support group as a bad thing. You look at it as a way to keep yourself well, and that takes time. Again, we said before, community resource for teens and for families. There's a parent support group. We have alumni programs. There's AA. There's NA. There's a lot of different programs and different supports that we can offer to both families and to teens. Uh, Talking about this with reintegration. So encouraging advocacy and independence, refusing with confidence. So this is something I talk a lot about when I go to schools, is how to refuse confidently. This comes easier to some than others, but we used to teach kids to lie about why they're not using drugs and alcohol. And I still say that if you're in a situation you feel like lying's the only way to get out of it, then go ahead and lie to get yourself out of it. But then I would reflect on that choice and why you were in that situation in the first place, and why did you feel the need to lie about making a healthy choice to stay sober. I instead today talk to kids about refusing confidently, with their facial expressions, their tone of voice, their body language, being confident in that choice to refuse, because everyone's insecure. And if you can display confidence in your choice to refuse, and you limit the scenarios where you're going to be pressured like that, and you try and surround yourself with positive people who will back you up, it does make a big difference. I mean, it happens to me to this day, right? I'm 36 years old, and I will go out to places and I'll walk in, and you'll have no idea that I have this story. You'll have no idea I'm in recovery if I can be around certain people that don't know my history. And I get offered alcohol. Happens frequently. And sometimes you get offered alcohol and you say no, and that's the end of it. But sometimes people question you. I'm like, oh, why? You're not drinking? Why? What are you driving? I'm like, no, I'm not driving. Like, oh, come on, man, have a drink. And I say, no, I'm good. And they get the point. I even give students some time I give them permission to be a little bit rude if you have to be. But if you can teach your kid to refuse confidently, to also redirect, offer something else to do, to try and limit their exposure as much as they can, that is a very important piece, especially early on in recovery. Recognizing small victories and progress. So I spoke to a father recently and was talking to me about his own journey and what he's going through with his kid. And one of the things I said to him is, you have to redefine what success is for your child, for your adolescent at this stage of his life. I'm not telling you that he can't be an extremely successful person. I know his son well. I believe that he can be. But at this time, you have to redefine what success looks like. And one day sober and going to a meeting and going to the gym for a little while and not having a blow up fight with your teen, that is a big success. Whereas some parents would be like, that's not very successful. That's just, basic stuff. That's why I say you have to redefine what that looks like for your teen at this given time. And as they start to build confidence and build self-esteem and feel confident in their recovery, then that definition can start to change and they can start to take those healthy risks, right? And build relationships and work on their education and work on their employment and what they want to do with the rest of their life. Like all that stuff can come afterwards, but recognizing very small victories and we say progress, not perfection. To me, that's such an important piece of this. Shifting the narrative from surviving to thriving as a family. When you were stuck in it, you feel like every day is a battle, and it is. And you're just trying to get through the day. But that's not living. That's just, barely surviving. You want to thrive as a family. And you can get to a point where, and this is the second, the last bullet on this slide here, is where you can actually strengthen your relationship with your family through this. And over time, I was able to do that with my parents and with my brothers now today. I mean, all of them are more understanding people who have mental health and addiction struggles because of everything that happened with me. We have a bond today that is stronger because of what we went through. Nobody wishes it happens in the first place, but when it does, if you can educate yourself, if you have other kids in your house, they have brothers and sisters, and you educate them as well, and your teen is able to come out the other side of this, you can actually become stronger because of it. That's not a quick fix. That's a long-term thing, but I've seen it happen for so many families over time. So for the remainder of the time here, I do want to open the floor for some questions. Those are the main points that we wanted to hit on tonight. So I'm gonna open up the floor. You can type it into the chat, and if there's any other questions, just please feel free to ask. So one question here is, how long is it recommended an adolescent stay in treatment? You mentioned 28 days wasn't adequate. And so I can't give a hard answer. I can't say, oh, well, it has to be 180 days. It's going to be different for each person. But what I will say, particularly for adolescents who have mental health and addiction struggles early on, that I rarely see 28 days alone being enough. I mean, for me, when it worked, I went through a year of step down recovery, and then lived in sober living afterwards. And so it is a lifelong process. And I would listen to the therapists, to the counselors, to the treatment professionals on what it is they recommend. Because my father talks about this to this day when I was at an inpatient program and it was 28 days and they were saying I needed extended care, I needed aftercare, and I didn't want to go. I said, I want to move home. I'll do some outpatient and that'll be it. And the guy at the aftercare center was saying, I can actually see him relapsing. I could visualize it. And they wanted to give me another chance because a lot can happen in 28 days in terms of like how we feel and how we sound, right? Like I would walk into a detox, I'd be there for like 5 to 7 days, and another 28 days in an inpatient, and I would look and sound like a completely different person pretty quickly. And I can convince my parents that I'm well, I'm cured, but what's going on up here? Not even close. And so longer is shorter, right? But what I mean by that is that if you go for long-term treatment, you have a much better chance of getting this on the first try or the second try versus people I've seen who've been to dozens of treatment programs for years and years and years. And so trying to not take any shortcuts and to just take it one day at a time, but listening to what the professionals at Guardian have to say and taking those treatment recommendations. Question 2 here is, how can I approach my teen if I think they're using to avoid defensiveness? Right. So This is a really tough one because, and this is something that I talk about with teens as well, and this is something that we'll do at Guardian, is that when you live dishonestly, when you use and you lie about using for such a long period of time, there's going to be a period of time where your teen is doing the right thing and you don't believe that they are. That's a really difficult place to be because you're unsure. Maybe there's some old habit or behavior that's triggering something with you, and you're unsure of it. And so, keeping a calm, cool, collected tone when approaching them and telling them exactly why. But there is no, miracle solution to that. They could come off as defensive. And this is where, drug tests are beneficial and say, all right, listen, and this is something that would be dealt with beforehand. If we feel like, if for any reason we feel like you're using again, you have to be willing to submit to a drug test. And it's a sure way of knowing. And so just really trying to say calm, cool, collected, approach them and let them know exactly why it is you have this suspicion that you feel like they're using, right? Tell them exactly what it is that you're seeing, give them a chance to respond. Maybe there's an explanation for it, maybe they're just having a bad day. And if you really believe that they're using again, then that's what a drug test can be for. May not be you doing the test. If they're seeing a counselor, maybe the counselor does a test. There's drug testing facilities, different ways of doing it. Should I change anything about the living environment once my teen comes home from treatment, like removed alcohol? Yes, I would say that you are, especially at the beginning when they first come home, you don't want to have all of those triggers in the home. So I would get rid of that. In my opinion, I think that you should get rid of that stuff. I think that you should make your home conducive to recovery, especially at the beginning. This is especially true for adolescents who don't have that same level of maturity. There are some adults like later on where we start to feel even worse that people are like changing their behaviors for us. But at the very beginning, especially, get all of that out of your home. Don't leave it to chance. That just shouldn't be in your home at all at the very beginning. I mean, at some point that may change, but until you feel like they have a strong foundation, this goes back to leading by example and creating an environment that's conducive to recovery. How do I know if my child needs mental health treatment? So you may not know 100%, but you have to go with your instinct on it. And then when you have your instinct on it, that's when you go and you reach out for help. It's not something you're supposed to be diagnosing yourself. It's strange that when it comes to mental health and addiction, and this I think goes to the stigma piece of it, that there are parents who want to try and deal with it all on their own. But if you felt like your kid could have cancer, would you even hesitate to reach out to a doctor and to do exactly what you need to do to find out if your kid has cancer? It wouldn't even be a question. But when it comes to mental health, to addiction treatment, there's a stigma there, or sometimes parents feel like they fail as a parent because the kid has these mental health struggles or has this addiction. They want to fix it themselves. It doesn't work that way. You have to be willing to ask for help from somebody who's trained to deal with this and who knows how to. Are there any other types of additional therapies available to kids in Guardian programs? So, um, the therapist could probably speak better to this than I could. I know that we offer different types of therapies, like surf therapy, like in the Boca area. There's definitely like a more like holistic approach. We do have something called SoreFit that we're working on with Dr. Frank, which is really incorporating physical fitness and mental health, and the two definitely go together. It was a big part of my early recovery. Still a big part of my recovery today is incorporating physical fitness into my recovery. I lift weights today much more for my mental health than for my physical health. I notice the difference on the days that I exercise and the days that I don't. So there are a lot of different holistic approaches you can take to helping somebody who is in early recovery or for long term recovery as well. Question: what should I do if my child relapses? So this is why, ongoing treatment and ongoing support is crucial. That's something where you would bring in a counselor, you'd reach back out to guardian, you could try and call a one-on-one conversation. It could mean, and it depends on the scenario, it depends on the situation. I mean, if your kid had one drink and you caught them have one drink, then you sit them down, you try and figure out why you do it in the first place, what led you there, reminding them that that's not something that we do in our home. That's not something that's acceptable, but we understand that this is a really difficult process for you. And so we encourage you to reach out to your counselor and to your network. But for the time being, you can't do X, Y, and Z. You're not going to be able to go out with your friends. We need to keep a close eye on you. So it's going to depend on each individual situation on what that process is going to look like. And unfortunately, sometimes it means the person has to go back into treatment again. Every situation is differently, but I would first ask why. What led you there? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? Were you thinking about it beforehand? And they may not want to talk to you about it. Everybody serves a role here. You can take the same message, but who's the messenger? Who's the person who's talking to them? It's the reason why schools bring me in to speak. I mean, they're hearing these messages from different teachers and counselors and from administrators and coaches, but that's the same person in an authority, in like some type of authority. Yeah, sometimes it means that it has to be a mentor, it has to be a counselor, somebody from their network who's going to be the one to talk to them about it. If I'm, recovery is a lifelong process. If I have an urge to use, and it still comes now and then, I'm not calling my mom to talk about it. I'm calling people in my network. I might talk to one of my counselors. Like, it's not something I'm going to do. And so you have to be willing to accept that fact that there are some situations where there are situations you can always support your child, but you may not be the one who's going to directly help your child in every single situation. What was the biggest challenge I faced getting sober from a young age? It was a social piece of it. It was. I mean, I had the same group of friends for so long, and here's where I really struggled is I had like two groups of friends. I had friends where they weren't really my friends, but it was just a group of people I hung out with where I was using drugs every time I hung out with them, and I was drinking every time I hung out with them. And really, our only purpose for hanging out with each other was to use substances. And so, coming out of treatment, the goal was to stay away from them and to hang out with my real friends. But the problem is that even my real friends, most of them on the weekends sometimes were drinking and sometimes they were smoking, but it wasn't manifesting itself as a problem in the same way as it was for me. And because those friends were uneducated on addiction, they would say things like, "Oh, just drink sometimes, or just smoke every once in a while," and I'd go back to it and I'd try to control it. I'd try to manage it. Before I know it, I'm right back where I was before, and then a little bit worse. And so, just teaching your child to maintain those healthy boundaries for themselves, they have to have a social life, right? Like I saw the data recently that in this last year, teen use has gone down overall, which is a great thing. But if a teenager tells me they're not using drugs or alcohol, I say, great. What are you doing instead? Because if their answer is, "Oh, I'm staying home in my room at night by myself on my phone all night," that's not good either. Some would argue it's even worse, right? Relationships, it's like the foundational of being a human being. So I would say to be able to still have a social life, but to try and navigate that as best as they possibly can, and understanding that you can never 100% prevent your teen from being exposed to substances. It's going to happen sometimes, and just really trying to do your best to navigate that. If they feel like they're in a risky situation, that's where they call you for help. They're able to get that phone call at any time. I think every parent should have that conversation with their kids, where if they are in a sticky situation and they make that phone call, that there's no questions asked. You're not going to be grounded or in trouble. You're going to have a conversation about it. But every kid needs that, because the answer can't be, "Oh, just stay home." That can't be the answer. Maybe at like the very beginning you're doing that, but at some point they have to go out and they have to have a social life. And if you're dealing with adolescents, and you're back in a public school, especially, I mean, it's very hard to avoid that completely. And so just having those open and honest conversations, teaching them to refuse confidently, all that stuff together, and just really taking it one day at a time. How should kids talk about use with peers? Do you recommend they disclose their sobriety? I would recommend that they're sober, that they disclose their sobriety if they feel that they're comfortable doing so. And I think we need to help them get there, because hiding from it, it's it just that is just for me personally. This is a tough question, because I think about some friends of mine who are sober, and I know they're sober, and their close family members know they're sober, but they don't like outwardly identify as somebody in recovery. Like, they don't talk about it very openly. And so it does depend on each individual person. But what can't happen is they can't be shameful of their sobriety. They can't be shameful of their recovery. But if they do feel comfortable, then yes, it's something to take pride in, and something to put on notice for those close friends of theirs. And one of the things that we talk about is, if you are sober and you're letting your peers know that you're sober and this is something that's important to you, it's something you're trying to do, and that person doesn't respect it, then they're not really a friend. And sometimes it's difficult for you to find that out, but it's just a hard fact of life. It's a hard fact of early recovery, especially for teens, for adolescents. So I do feel that they should, at the very least, not be shameful of it. But yes, if they feel confident enough to disclose it. Okay, so we can go to the last slide here. Okay. So if anyone needs to connect with Guardian Recovery for support and for any more resources, go to guardianrecovery.com. Our phone number is on there as well. You can reach out for any reason if you have somebody who is already in treatment, if you are looking to get somebody in the treatment, or just interested in learning more, want some more resources. Feel free to reach out to me directly as well. My website is speaksobriety.com. My email's on there as well. It's stephen.hill@grncare.com. So that's just a way to reach out to Guardian and to reach out to me. So that we'll conclude for tonight, but appreciate everybody for signing on. Appreciate all the questions. Thank you very much, and have a great night.